everybody, good morning. I am so excited to talk with you today about poop. All right, so my name is Carolyn Byers. I'm the education director at Madison Audubon. Usually I am out teaching kids in classrooms and community centers all around Madison, Wisconsin. Right now, though, we can't do that. Obviously, all the schools and community centers are closed down. So instead, we're trying to provide as much online content as we can for you. And this lesson is part of our Safer and Funner at Home program. And you can find all of the lessons that we're putting out during this time at madisonaudubon.org on our Safer and Funner page. And we've got all kinds of cool stuff. I've done bird yoga lessons and nature journaling lessons. We did one about skulls last week. It was so cool. And there's also lots of stuff you can do at home with your parents online too. So check it out if you're looking for something fun to do. And today we're going to be talking about scat. Animal poop. Look at this. Very cool, huh? I do want to tell you that all of this poop is actually rubber. So it's okay that I'm holding what looks like a big pile of poop because this is actually rubber, so I can't get sick from it. One of the reasons I love animal poop is because you can be a nature detective when you find it. Animals poop all the time, just like us. And when you find animal poop, you don't actually have to see the animal to know that it was there. Poop is one of those things that it hangs around in the landscape for a while, right? A footprint that could be gone in a few minutes or hours, depending on what the weather's like. Bones could be there for years and years, but poop, that kind of lasts like maybe a week, maybe a little bit longer, depending on what kind of environment you're in. And so it definitely tells you that the animal was there recently, which is kind of cool. So I love being a nature detective and figuring out what kind of animals are in the area. But there are some really important rules to follow when you're out looking around for poop. So rule number one is we don't touch it with our hands. I like to find a really good poking stick so that I can poke the poop and see what's in it. But I want you to know that I don't want you to touch it with your hands. And if you're with an adult, you should probably ask them first before you go poking it with a stick. So what makes a good poking stick? It needs to be at least this long. So at least as long as your arm right here. That'll keep your fingers nice and far away from the poop. And it has to be pretty strong so that it doesn't break and accidentally let your fingers touch it. So if you want to explore poop while you're out, you need to get a poking stick. And the next thing you need to know is that we're all going to wash our hands after we're done using the poking stick, just in case. So bring some hand sanitizer with you if you're out looking for poop. Okay, so we were talking about why animals poop. And animals poop for the same reasons we do. They eat food. They can't use all of the food in their body. And so they eliminate the waste. So it's just their body getting rid of the things that they don't need. Animals also poop to mark their territories. I hope humans don't do this. Most of the time, we put our poop in a toilet. But animals will poop along the edges of their boundaries in their home where they live. And they'll also poop in sometimes their favorite spots, so spots they really want to mark as their own. And so if you ever find poop in the middle of a trail or sometimes in the middle of a sidewalk, that's an animal claiming that spot for their own, which is really kind of cool. Animals also poop to kind of communicate with each other. So marking their boundaries is part of that. When humans smell poop, most of the time, we just think it smells stinky like poop. But animals, when they smell another animal's poop, they can learn a lot about that animal from it. Usually they can tell if it's a male or a female, so it's a boy or a girl. They can often tell if that animal is looking for a mate, if they want to have babies. And they can usually tell, like wolves especially, can tell a lot about how dominant an animal is, if they're really big and tough, or if maybe they're not so strong. So poop tells animals a whole lot, and it's really useful for them. But when we find poop, usually we're trying to figure out what kind of animal made that poop. And when we're doing that, we look a lot at the shape. So this poop here looks a lot different from this poop, right? And they have really different shapes and sizes. And part of the reason their shapes and sizes are different is because the animals that made them are different shapes and sizes. Their bodies are different, but also because the animals were eating different things. This poop is very small and round. And actually, if it wasn't made out of rubber, all of these little round pieces would not be connected. They would roll around like marbles or like cereal. This poop is really, really big pieces. And it's like a big tube with blunt edges. Like if you had like a Play-Doh maker that makes a big tube and then you cut the ends. That's what this poop looks like. And all of these big pieces, they're not stuck together in real life, but they would probably, this is usually a wetter poop. They like to stick together. So does anybody know what these poops might be? I'm going to keep talking about animals, and if you think you know, you can guess who made these poops. So a lot about, like I said, what the animal eats is a part of their poop. And everybody think about your own poop. That's a silly thing. Everybody think about your own poop and think about, does it always look the same? Is it always the same shape or the same size or the same color? I know my poop is not always the same. It depends on what I'm eating, how much water I'm drinking, and animals are the same way. What about, does anybody have a pet animal at home? I have 2 cats and a dog, and I know that their poop always looks pretty similar. It's usually the same color and the same texture. And that's because my pets usually eat the same thing. They always eat dog food or cat food. Sometimes they swap. But they're mostly just eating the same thing. So their poop always looks like it's the same color brown and it's always the same texture. But animals, they often change the food they eat depending on the season. So I said I was going to tell you what this poop is. And this is bear poop. It's really big. It's a black bear. And we do have black bears in Wisconsin, and I have seen black bear poop while I'm out hiking. And sometimes the poop looks just like this. It's very big, very brown. And sometimes the poop looks a lot more like a pile of berries that's maybe a little muddy. And that happened in the fall when the bear was eating lots and lots of berries. Other times you'll find poop like this with a lot of hair in it. And they get the hair in there because they eat a mammal, another animal, that has fur on it, and they eat some of that fur, and their bodies can't digest it, and so they end up pooping it out. So when we're trying to figure out what kind of animal made a poop, we have to be super big detectives because we have to think about what they could be eating and how that might change the way the poop looks. All right, so I already said that this was a black bear. Did anybody have a guess about what kind of poop this is? Not seeing any guesses show up, so I'm going to tell you. It is an elk. And an elk is like a very big deer. And we just got some new elk in Wisconsin. There used to be elk in Wisconsin naturally before white settlers came. And then we hunted them too much and they became extirpated, which means there were no elk in Wisconsin, but they lived in other places. And recently, maybe within the last 5 years, I forget when it happened, scientists brought some elk in from a different herd and released them in Wisconsin. And that, I'm just seeing, maybe we're having trouble with the comments. I just see, or some water. That's interesting. They brought new elk into Wisconsin, and our herds are just becoming established now. So if you're ever up in northwestern Wisconsin and you see poop like this, little balls that are maybe about the size of your fingertip, that is elk. And moose make poop that are even bigger than this, which is so neat. So they have mostly round little pellets. I'm going to show you another one. So this one here looks very similar. They're little round balls, and they have a little pokey bit right at one end, and they have a little dimple at the other end. And these poops are made by another type of deer, a mule deer. And mule deer, they're not in Wisconsin, they live out west, but they look a lot like our white-tailed deer. And they're about the same size, maybe a little bit bigger. So this is white-tailed deer poop. So all of these deer make poops that are little round balls. And depending on how big the animal is, elk are the biggest, white-tailed deer are the smallest, the size of their poop changes. And that's pretty neat. They have all these little pellets. Now I'm going to show you another one. This one here. It's very round little balls. And this animal makes poop that's about the same size as a white-tailed deer. But this animal is much smaller. This one is a cottontail rabbit. These are the little rabbits we see hopping around in our neighborhoods and out in the wild. And they produce poop that's almost the same size as the white-tailed deer, which I think is so neat. Their bodies are such different sizes. Rabbits, though, their poop is a bit more round. It is a little bit flattened, like if you had a round piece of Play-Doh and you just smushed it a tiny bit, but it's rounder than the white-tailed deer poop. And I think it's very interesting that their poop is the same shape. And who knows what kinds of foods deer and rabbits eat? Are they carnivores? Who knows what carnivore means? Carnivore. Carnivore means to eat meat. And some animals that eat meat are wolves and coyotes and bobcats and cougars, weasels. So a carnivore eats mostly meat. Some of them, like coyotes and wolves, they eat some plants too, maybe some berries or grasses. What's the opposite of a carnivore? An animal that eats only plants. What do you think? Starts with an H, but it sounds like herbivore. So an herbivore is an animal that eats only plants, or mostly only plants, because if a deer is eating plants and there's bugs on it, do you think the deer eats the bugs too, or do you think it picks it off? And they eat the bugs too. So an herbivore is an animal that is trying to eat plants. Might eat some other things. Oh, thanks, Beth. Yep, herbivore for sure. And what's an animal that eats both meat and plants? Do you know? It's an omnivore. And a really good example of an omnivore is a bear. And bears eat fish, and they eat some baby deer. They eat mammals that they can catch, like rabbits, but they also eat a lot of berries and some grasses and buds and acorns, all sorts of stuff. Bears usually just eat what they can put in their mouth. So what are humans? Some people make choices about what they want to eat. Some eat a lot of meat. Others eat only plants. So people can choose to be only carnivorous or only herbivorous. But people are typically omnivores too. We eat a lot of things. I eat a lot of things. And we can tell a lot about what an animal eats by its teeth. And if you want to hear more about animals and their teeth, you can watch our skull video. But humans have a lot of teeth that are different because we're omnivores. So everybody feel, either using your tongue or using your finger, Feel your molars. Those are the teeth way in the back. Those are what we use to chew up our food, to grind our food. Molars are really flat on top, or at least flatter than our other teeth. And those are really good for grinding up food, especially plants that are a little bit tougher and need a lot more chewing. And we have our canines here. These are our pokey teeth. Some people call them your vampire teeth. And those are teeth that would help us rip meat if we wanted to. We also have our incisors. Oh, and these are teeth that carnivores like wolves and bobcats, those are the really long ones that they have. They look like fangs. And we also have our incisors up here, and those are really good at biting food, chomping them. We could not eat corn on the cob if we didn't have incisors. Well, I suppose we have tools because we're humans, but it would be harder without our teeth if we couldn't use tools. All right, so we talked about carnivores and omnivores and herbivores, and that influences what the animal eats, which also influences what their poop looks like. So I showed you all of these poops, which are round little balls, and told you that most of them were made by deer with pretty large bodies, but this one was made by a rabbit with a small body. And they all have similar poops because they're herbivores. They all eat mostly plants, and their poop looks like this. So now I want to show you some carnivore poop. This one, it's a very big poop. You can see it has this little end to it, this little pokey, pointy end. And it's kind of a long tube, but it's broken up into little chunks. And here's another one too. This one does not have the pokey end on it, but I think it should. These two were made by cats that live or travel through Wisconsin. This one is a mountain lion, and this one is a bobcat. And a lot of people describe cat poops as Tootsie Rolls with one end that got a little bit pokey and twisty at the end of it. And the reason their poops they're long tubes like this and they have this end on them is because these animals are carnivores. And like I said with the bear, when they eat meat, they also eat the animal's fur with it. And those fur end up helping to make the poop very long, because usually the fur is longish. And it helps, it sort of goes along the length of the poop and helps draw it out. And this little curly tail at the end is usually a little clump of hair that sort of got smoothed together, sort of like the end of a paintbrush. So these guys have poop that looks like this because of the food that they eat. And I'm going to show you, this is a large dog's poop, and this is a coyote poop. And a coyote is usually about 40 pounds, which is what my son weighs right now, which is kind of fun to think about. And they look very similar. I know they're different colors, but that's just the colors that the scientist chose who was making the rubber poop. But the shape of them is very similar. It's a longish tube, and it's usually left in a pile. And one end is a little bit pointier than the other. And so this is a really interesting thing to think about. If most dog poop, foxes, I have some fox poop right here. Some fox poop, it's a little smaller, but it's kind of the same basic shape. Most dog poop looks pretty similar. So even though domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, foxes, they all have very different sized bodies, their poops are pretty similar in shape. Must be because their butts look pretty similar. No, their organs on the inside, they're all basically the same structure. And so they produce poops that look very similar. But remember what I said about my pet dog food, or my pet dog and how it eats dog food? That's a really easy way to tell if you're looking at someone's pet dog's poop or if you're looking at a wild dog's poop. Now, first of all, if anybody has a pet dog and they're out walking it, they should be picking up their poop. But we know that not everybody does that. And so when we're out looking, we have to think about whether a scat could be a pet or a wild animal. And one of the things I think about is whether whether the poop is found on a trail. And usually, if it's on a trail, I think about whether or not I see lots of people around or whether there's human footprints right next to the poop. And that's a fun thing to think about. But coyotes and foxes like to use human trails when we're not using them. So when we're all in our houses or in our beds at night, coyotes and foxes are using our hiking trails too, which is super cool to think about. But that means that just because you find poop on a trail, it doesn't mean that it's a pet dog. It could be a wild dog. So what I really like to do to make sure is I get my poke and stick and I poke it a little bit and I see if I can see any bits of berries or bones or fur in it. And if I can, it's probably a wild dog. But if I only see brown, mushy pet dog poop, it's probably just a pet. Because those are the animals that are eating mostly dog food, which makes their poop look all the same. So that's why a poke and stick is really important. And the same is true of cat poop. So a lot of times bobcats and house cats, their poops are about the same size. But bobcats are out in the wild eating all kinds of things with fur and feathers on them. And house cats should be inside, although if there's poop outside, maybe not. But their poop will have a lot less fur and feathers in it because house cats eat mostly cat food. They should eat all cat food. Keep your cats inside. All right, so we talked about looking at what's inside the poop to see if it's a pet or if it's a wild animal. And we talked about the shape of the poop. If it's long and like a tube with maybe a pointy end on it, it's probably a carnivore. And if it's a round pellet, it's probably an herbivore. And an omnivore is somewhere in between. So this bear poop, it's not a round pellet, right? But it's also not a super duper long tube, and it does not have that little pointy end on it. And that's, again, because of the bear's diet. It produces something kind of in the middle of a carnivore and an herbivore. Because it's an omnivore, it's kind of in the middle. So that was all pretty cool. I really like poop. I have some other poops that we can look at just to talk about. There's a whole bunch of animals, especially smaller animals, that make kind of different shaped poops that are a little bit interesting. So I have a skunk poop here. It's kind of small. I don't think it's always just two little lines like this, but I do think it's probably a longer tube than, this coyote poop, which has a lot of little segments in it. So skunk poop is kind of cool, and it's smaller than I would have expected, given how big a skunk is. Skunks are kind of big animals. I also have some opossum poop. And opossums and skunks and raccoons, they all live really easily in our neighborhoods. They're very good at adapting to life with humans. They can find food in our gardens, in our parks, and definitely in our garbage. So it's really important to make sure your garbage is secure so that these animals can't get into it. And opossums are pretty neat. They're actually not so well adapted to living in Wisconsin because they have those long tails and they have fingers that don't have fur on them. So in very, very cold winters, opossums have a lot of trouble surviving in Wisconsin, and some of them can get a lot of frostbite on their hands and their tails. And then this last poop I have is not a mammal at all. It's actually a turkey. Wild turkeys are pretty big birds. Turkeys and geese both make big poops that are pretty easy to find. And they'll often have either brown or green long tubes, and one end of it will have a lot of white on it. So if you find something that looks like a poop like this, but with one white end, it's probably a turkey. And goose poops are bigger than this. All right, so I have just a few more cool facts for you, and then a song. So my really cool fact about this cottontail rabbit, it's pretty gross. Are you ready for it? Rabbits eat their own poop. Ooh. So don't eat your own poop. It's not something that's healthy for humans. But rabbits, they eat mostly grasses, sometimes twigs and buds, but they eat really, really hard things that are hard to digest. And there's not a lot of nutrition in them. So the food that we eat usually is, well, should be pretty high nutritional value. So it's easy to digest. Our body gets lots of good things from it. And we don't need a whole lot of it compared to our body weight, right? But rabbits, the food they eat, it doesn't have as much nutrients in it, not as many good things for them. And so they have to eat a whole lot of that food to get what they need from it. And actually, the first time they digest it, they don't get all of it, all the nutrients out of it. There's still good stuff in there. And so what they'll do is they'll find a safe spot where they feel pretty comfortable, and they'll poop, and then they will eat all of their poop. Ooh. And then they'll digest it again, and they'll get all the good stuff out of it. So the first time rabbits poop, it's kind of a little bit like the texture of our poop with more grasses in it, I guess. So it's wetter and darker brown, and that's not something you usually see in the wild because they usually eat it. But when you find a lot of rabbit poop, usually it's very, very dried out, and you can see like pieces of grass in it all just held together. And that's the second time they've eaten it. And that's after they've gotten all of the good stuff out of it that they can. And there's really nothing left for them in it. And so this time when they poop, they just leave it there. And so rabbit poop is really, really cool. Don't eat your poop. It's not healthy for you. All right, so we talked about all of the poop that I have out. So if anyone would like to see any type of poop again, or if they have any questions, please type it in now, or have a grown-up that's with you type it in. And I'm going to sing you my scat song. So this is a song that I learned when I was at a camp when I was a kid. And it's really fun because it talks about scat. And I don't know if I've talked about the word scat yet. That's crazy that we're a half an hour into this and I haven't even talked about the word scat. So there's a lot of words for poop, right? Some of them you're allowed to say, some of them you're not allowed to say. Doctors might call it, what do doctors call it? They might call it a bowel movement. Scientists might call it fecal matter or feces. Scientists also call animal poop scat. So it's just another word for animal poop. And my song helps you remember the name of it. So it says, it starts with an S and it ends with a T. It comes out of you and it comes out of me. I know what you're thinking, but don't call it that. Let's be scientific and call it scat. It was a piece of scat, piece of scat. So, you want to sing with me at home? Because I know you know all the words already. Let's try it. Ready? It starts with an S and it ends with a T. It comes out of you and it comes out of me. I know what you're thinking, but don't call it that. Let's be scientific and call it scat. It was a piece of scat, piece of scat. And I think if you look it up online, it's actually a much longer song. But if you just Google the Scat Song, you can find it. It's pretty great. So I'm not seeing any more questions pop up right now, but that's okay. So what I'm going to leave you with is that being a nature detective is super cool. You can look for fur and feathers and footprints and nests and holes in the ground or in trees, all kinds of signs out there that animals were here. But scat or poop is definitely my favorite animal sign because it tells us so much. You can look in it and try to find what the animal was eating based on if you know what you're looking for. Based on how wet it is, you can try to figure out how long ago the animal made the scat. It might tell you things about its territory depending on where you find them. So scat is really, really, really interesting. And people, real scientists, spend their whole lives studying scat. And there's whole field books that have pictures in them about all different kinds of animal scats to help you identify them. And they're also all online. So the next time you're out hiking and you see some poop on the ground, Maybe get a stick, poke it a little bit, see what's in there. And before you start poking it, take a picture of it so that you can try and find out what it is later. Yeah, and then wash your hands after. So scat is really, really neat. And what I want to remind you of also is that as long as you're being safe right now, you can still go outside. You can take walks around your block. You can go to parks as long as you make sure they're open first, they're not closed. So just make sure you're only going with members of your own household, people that you're in quarantine with, or people that you're being safer at home with. And make sure you stay away from other groups of people so that we're all being very safe. But you can still go outside. You can still go listen to birds and go on a hike and look for nature and animals, because nature is there for you. And I know I feel much more relaxed and calm when I'm out in nature. And I hope that you're able to find that too. So check out our lessons on MadisonAudubon.org on our Safer and Funner at Home page. And look for more lessons coming. There's one later this week we're going to do on Build-A-Bird, all about bird adaptations. And if you have suggestions for lessons, send us an email or comment under this video. I'd love to hear them. All right, everybody, be well. Take care. Thanks.